I'm Holly Von Sinn. I am a burlesque artist, naked artist, clown, stripper, performance artist, sewist, weirdo, naked weirdo. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a non-binary femme. Whoop, whoop, femmes who, them. And welcome to my closet where things are mostly organized and hopefully not too stinky. The full origin story is I was a theater kid in high school. I went to Victoria High School. I did clown there and physical theater, acting, technical theater, all that fun stuff. And when I was out of high school, I became like a punk rock party kid. And it was around the rockabilly scene. Burlesque was this thing that was like, you'd go see a band and sometimes they'd have these like boxy dancing ladies with them. And I was like, that seems cool. And then one day I was at a Capital City Burlesque show at the Starlight Room. Shout out to both those wonderful organizations. And a friend of mine in the punk rock scene came up to me and was like, hey, you're a theater kid. Do you want to come do burlesque? And I was like, sure, why not? And a month later, I debuted my first show, also at the Starlight Room. I have done that ever since. I started doing it professionally a couple years in, where I like really was like, this is the career path I want, for better or worse. So this was the first pasty I ever made and the first pasty I wear for a Little Red Riding Hood act. It's glitter that we glued to just some Bikram, which is what I still use to make pasties. And then we just put a tassel in. So this is also one of my first G-strings that I ever wore. When I started, people didn't wear G-strings. People wore full back panties when I started. And I was one of the first people in Edmonton, one of the first people in Alberta to bring back the thong. And I believe I bought it at a sex store and then rhinestoned it myself.
Wonderful. It seems like there's a lot of creativity and ingenuity that goes into creating burlesque costumes. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that's like for you?
Yeah, the process has definitely evolved for me over the years as I've gotten more interested in sewing and designing and making on my own. But for me, making a costume, it's such an integral part of the storytelling of burlesque. My friend Latabby Lexington said to me years ago that burlesque is like musical theater, but instead of singing the emotional parts, we strip the emotional parts. And I've always sort of carried that in my mindset. So building costumes that tell the story, that further the story, has always been really important. And it's such a DIY industry. Like, so many people are their own makers. You're your own manager, your agent, your costumer, your makeup artist, your hair, you're a one-man army. And so, yeah. And so it's hard to see in my closet, but you can see kind of up above there's these suitcases, and that's where a lot of my old costumes live. There's also sort of a case down at the bottom where a lot of this old stuff lives. This was like one of the first. This was my very first G-string that I actually just found. That you can see like all the sequins have fallen off over the years. This is a Licenza G-string that I put dollar store plastic rhinestones on, using Oog, using E6000, which I don't recommend anybody use unless you have good ventilation and a respirator, because it's very toxic. This was one of my first bras. So again, I bought the bra at the store and then I put, it's like sequined, like strips of elastic sequin.
Okay.
And then if you look at the inside,
oh yeah,
not the best sewer was I 10 years ago. So I don't use sequin really anymore. That's a big change. I've moved away from sequins. My quality rhinestones, like as you see with this piece next to me, I didn't sew this piece. This is a wonderful creation from Elise from Sweet Carousel. But I did all the embellishments. So as you can see on this costume, there's drop beading, there's intricate rhinestones. The quality of rhinestones is much higher. The difference between me going, this was one of my first costumes for a solo, and it's literally a dress I bought at Ricky's. Zero embellishments, literally off the rack, Ricky's dress that I bought. Versus the piece like this costume that's on mannequin next to me, which is a fully customized collaboratory venture between me and a beautiful designer and artist, like a fellow designer and artist. So this is for my Moth act, which is probably one of my favorite acts. It's an award-winning act. I've traveled all across North America and Europe, which is super fun. If you notice how bulky this dress is. So one of my favorite things is I wanted to do a moth act. The conception was I wanted to do an act about a moth chasing the light. I really love the idea of a moth chasing a light, and also kind of influenced by like the old Red Skelton sketch where he's sweeping up the spotlight, the clown. Wanted to play on that, and I wanted to do a moth without being a winged creature. Generally in burlesque, when you see moths on stage, they'll have like big silk wings or Isis wings or something, which is great. They're beautiful. There's some performers who have some amazing moth costumes that fit that theme. I just wanted to do something different. So here's my like moth body. This costume has tens of thousands of rhinestones and beads, all hand placed by me, or I did have assistance from Jezebel Sinclair, who is an amazing local performer as well. And then the inside of this looks like this. Just like rhinestoned, and it's mothy. So you can see that it's based on like a lunar moth with the tail. Pull the tail out. It's got a train. It's one of the costumes that I literally can't back up in, because if I do, I will trip and die. And then on the back, you can see the tool continues with the train. You can notice the back on the mannequin if I bring it up a little. It's a little boot, a little booty out. So the corset and then the dress. The color combo was 100%. Elise made the suggestion of these beautiful colors. So that's the dress. And then I'll scooch you back up because it's probably not the most flattering take of me. And then if you take off the dress, ooh, one of those snaps is about to come off. I got to do some repairs on this bad boy. The dress comes off, and then it's this very beautiful, delicate thing. There's actually more beading and rhinestoning that needs to go onto this costume. This costume is actually not completely embellished, despite the fact that I've owned this costume now for many years. It's such a process. Like, all of this beading is hand done by me, all of the rhinestoning. Just sitting there with glue and a stick, needle and thread for ages and ages. So that's this costume. It's one of my favorites. It's such a beautiful, beautiful design and construction. And so over time, it went from being like a kind of supposed to be a clowny act to the song is called Seasons. The regional artist is not Lonely Island. Who's the original artist? I can't remember the original artist, but the cover I use is by a band called Bad Bad Not Good. And it's kind of like a jazzy song about love. And so the act is now about seeking the light, seeking love. So the song has sort of these frenetic moments, and then just moments of sort of stillness and calm. And it kind of switches back between the verse and chorus, between being very frenetic and being very still. And so I played into that, and I played into that when I perform it on stage. The lighting changes. So when it's frenetic, there's like kind of party lights and no sort of defined lighting on the stage. It's all just sort of a wash with lights going. And when it's still, the light comes down to just a spotlight, and then I'm just in the spotlight, and it's very still. And it's about that longing for love, that longing for being loved, for being touched, for being appreciated. And it's based on the frenzy of, you know, a moth at night, where you know, they're seeking this thing, and it envelops them, and it's passionate and sexy,
And
yeah.
I'm wondering if you can speak to your non-binary identity, and being drawn to such a hyper feminine art form. What's the relationship there? Can you dig into that for us?
Yeah, so I didn't come out as non-binary until I had started my burlesque journey. I spent a lot of my late teens, early 20s. You know, I was the awkward theater tech kid in high school, you know, big hoodies hiding my body. Obviously, always felt some sort of dysmorphia, or some sort of feeling around my identity and this vessel that my identity is in. I have a very traditionally feminine body shape. I'm very curvy. I'm very, you know, classic, like big boobs, small waist, big butt. And work through that, and in my early 20s became very like hyper feminine. Like you wouldn't see me without like full hair and makeup. Like I would come home after like school or work, take off my like daytime eyelashes, put on my bigger nighttime eyelashes. And like I said, I was involved in the punk rock scene, which is, you know, there's a lot of peacocking, there's a lot of fashion that's involved in that scene, and in the rockabilly, psychobilly scene that I was in, which is like kind of a subgenre of punk, where it is about your looks, it is about this fashion. It's a very pin-up style. I was a pin-up model before, so I did some pinup modeling. So I was just really, really dug into the idea of being hyper feminine, hyper femme. You know, before I knew what non-binary was, before I knew what I was, like, you know, I had those inklings, but I'm in my mid 30s. Growing up, we didn't have a lot of queer trans icons, let alone non-binary icons. Like there weren't. I think the first time I heard about someone being non-binary was Ray Spoon, who's a performer out of Montreal, and Ray was actually the first person I ever met. They were a friend of my brother's girlfriend at the time. They knew my brother's girlfriend, and I went to one of their shows, and they were the first trans person I had ever met. Like I had a lot of queer people around me. Like my aunt was involved in the queer drag community for eons, and knows those sort of legacy drag performers really well. So it wasn't that, but it was that first meeting of another trans person, and seeing myself in Ray, and seeing the potential for what we could be as humans. Because like I said, like I talked to some of these baby queers, and I'm like, we had like Sonny Bono, we had, you know, we had Hedwig and the Angry Inch, we had, you know, we had Ray if we were Canadian. I'm trying to think. We had like, you know, we had transgender people who would be on like Ricky Lake or Jerry Springer or Maury or Montel. Like, transness was a spectacle, and it was this really other things, and we didn't have a lot of resources. So when I got into burlesque, I just saw it as another extension of this sort of rockabilly, hyper feminine idea that I was chasing. And when I kind of started to come to terms with my own gender and what, you know, what my gender meant to me, um, it really locked in. This idea of burlesque really helped me to explore that, because I also do drag and clown, and I was able to explore what it feels like to dress in masculine clothes, what it feels to be masculine versus hyper feminine, and realizing that I exist. I always describe myself as like I am devoid of gender. That's how my non-binariness manifests itself for me. Is that like all gender to me is prescribed and is this outside force for me. It definitely is like not something I feel. Like I don't feel a gender. I don't wake up and go, I'm feeling really boy today. Like feeling really feminine today. I just sort of wake up and I'm like, how will I express this vessel today? How will I dress this vessel today? And I am a femme. I do identify as a queer femme person. Um, so I am still drawn to, like, I have fake nails, I have long hair, I wear makeup, I dress in dresses, um, as part of the performance of how I dress my vessel. And I feel like burlesque is an extension of that. Burlesque, Holly Von Sinn is still non-binary, because Holly Von Sinn in my brain is a bigger than life thing. Like Holly Von Sinn isn't a human being. They're just this creature of like chaos and magic and sexuality and power. And it's a way for me to express those things. It's a way for me to feel feminine or to feel masculine and to feel in control of those things and how I'm prescribed. Because as a femme, non-binary person, I often, every single day I walk out into the world, I am misgendered. Often with friends, even, my family tries really hard, but like sometimes they slip up, and people slip up, that happens. But like I get misgendered by friends, I get misgendered in shows. I do have privilege in the fact that like being a femme non-binary person in a body that has the parts that people traditionally think of connecting to those, is a privilege. But it can be really painful. It can be really, when people call me ma'am or her, like it hurts because that's not who I am. And so when I'm in a burlesque sphere, where burlesque is super politicized, and so people are really cognizant for the most part, and it is a way to like reclaim that power of like being really powerful and femme, and standing up and being a powerful non-binary femme. It is a way to express myself and feel embraced by that community, because I have surrounded myself, with friends and fellow artists who are also non-binary femmes. And not to even get into like femme erasure within queer spaces and femphobia and the BS I've experienced as like a non-binary femme, or even when I was still pretending to be a woman, being told by my queer community I wasn't enough or part of it. Like all of that aside, I found it really empowering, because it's a way to show aspects of my identity and to embrace them and feel them and move within them and be seen within them. That I can put on this beautiful dress and corset and heels and stockings and shake my breasts and shake my butt and be embraced and still be seen as a non-binary person, still be seen as a queer person within those moments. It's been so beneficial to me and so healing to me, and to find a community of other people who have struggled with those same struggles as I have, who've gone on similar explorations, and journeys in their lives, and to come together and be like, let's create weird, naked, sexy art with our weird bodies, because bodies are weird.
Maybe show us your newest piece in your collection.
Yeah, my most recent one would have to be, this is my Time Moves Slow Moonray Act. Again, made by Sweet Carousel. This is a collar, and then coming off the collar is this beautiful chiffon that like hooks and loops into my hand, that I manipulate and pass from hand to hand. And it's long, like I like fabric. You'll notice a theme that I just like flowy chiffon and fabric. Like I like how it looks on stage. I like how it moves. I like how it drapes. And the idea of this act was kind of like water and a storm on the ocean and just sort of smoke. And the other concept was I wanted an act. I wanted a party tit, as the kids say. So I got Elise to make this wonderful corset that's tight in the back, so it won't actually close on me unless I unlace it. But as you can see, one boob is always out from the beginning of the act. There's no bra, so the rest of the costume, get tangled, is just this little tiny G-string, little tiny invisible G-string, and then a skirt that goes over the corset. And then I use the cape to manipulate, to hide and cover my body. And the actual goal for this act is to do this act fully nude, underneath. So not having the underwear, not having pasties. But yeah, it's an asymmetrical one-cupped corset. And as you can see, There's appliques. I added the drop beading and rhinestoning to the appliques to just give it a little bit of movement. I'm a big fan of drop beading. I'm a big fan of like movement and fabric. So you'll see that theme emerge a lot in my pieces. I'll spend a year creating the act, getting the costume made, getting all the pieces together, getting the ideas together, rehearsing it, building it, and then it takes about another year of working it, of putting it on stages, of performing it, of practicing it more, of moving in it, of living in it. It usually takes me about 2 years to get a big act fully up and realized and on its feet and really polished. Another thing that really draws me to burlesque is it's very unlike a lot of other theater. It's so interactive and it's so personal and it's connected and it's I view burlesque as like this liminal ritual space that you inhabit and you enter as an audience or a performer, and you share that connection. So for me, every time I perform, I'm learning something new about that act. I'm learning something new about myself. So yeah, so that's my newest act.
What piece are you the most sentimental about?
Ooh, that is a really good question. Oh yeah, it has to be. So this is my Howard Van Zant. Howard is my clown, hobo, male character. He was one of my first characters I ever created for burlesque. The act that this costume is for is actually about my own gender dysphoria and about coming to terms with my body and loving my body. So not so much this jacket. This is gonna be kind of gross. This is kind of gross. Is it in a pocket? Sorry, I have to figure out where I put these pieces. Here it is. My most sentimental piece is these really disgusting underwear. As you can see, they're just pair of soggy butt boys briefs. And why they're sentimental is I stole these from my ex-partner who was a folk musician, like a touring folk musician. And I was doing this dusty little hobo folky character and it seemed to go well. So that is their underwear, as well as this is their hat. This is one of their old hats and it's the hat I wear on stage. So I would, even though that relationship did not end super well, I would say just purely because I stole his underwear and rhinestoned it.
What costume, or maybe it's all of them, that the moment you put it on, immediately you feel that sort of zing of empowerment?
I feel that empowerment the moment I hit the stage. For me, I think it's the vortex of the lights and the music and the energy of the crowd and the costume and the hair and the makeup. So I think my Howard costume, I feel really empowered in, I feel really comfortable in. I can be really vulnerable in that character in a way I tend not to be as much in other costumes or characters. I think because he is such a low status schleppy character that I'm able to be really honest and vulnerable in that character in those moments, and I think that's really empowering. I feel like vulnerability is really important. It's something I struggle with both on stage and off, being vulnerable with people. And I think it's a really like important part of the human experience. I think it's really important. I think it's really important within queer spaces for us to be vulnerable with each other and to be honest with each other. I'd love to highlight another costume by Sweet Carousel. You're going to see a lot of Sweet Carousel on my closet tour because Elise is amazing and her work is amazing and I love collaborating with her. My favorite detail, so this is my my witch act. We call it the witch act. It's a lot of layers, but it's also a Twin Peaks act. Oh. So it's loosely based around the concept of the Red Room, the Black Lodge, you know, so you see all these stripes and curtains. And my favorite part of this is my partner was working at Grant McEwen for a little bit and got access to, sorry, I have to like dig through this costume because it's a zillion layers. They got access to a 3D printer, and it's my favorite little detail on a costume that nobody seems to notice because it just seems like a classic thing, but they 3D printed me. It's a little owl symbol from Twin Peaks that just hangs off the zipper. So it's just a little 3D printed token of the owls. And it's just this little detail that like most people, it's a very like loosely based on Twin Peaks, which I feel like David Lynch would appreciate. But it's one of those things that like, if you're looking really closely, you'll see that symbol and be like, oh, Twin Peaks. And if you're really paying attention, but it's not super obvious, I think that's one of my favorite little like, just panties, the triangle bra, which I have tons of, which this is actually on this mannequin. It's hard to tell, but this is actually just like a more structured triangle bra. Like if I unzip this corset, that it's a very traditional shape. So yeah, panties, panties or merkins, depending on the time period. And again, blue laws, we do not have to get into the history of like blue laws, although I encourage people to really like look at the history of something called flappers, which were basically like little merkins. People would be naked because it was stripping, it was sex work. Like we need to acknowledge that burlesque has a history in sex work and also has a current and future in sex work. I like to shout out my sex worker friends and pals and community because they're important and important to burlesque and what we do. But it was against the law to show the nether regions back in the day. So they would have like these little bits of like basically a merkin that would hang down, and they'd have strings in their costumes, and they'd have a light at the front of the stage. And if the light was green, they'd pull the string and it would flap up, and they'd be able to show the audience everything. But if the light was red, that meant there was vice cops in the building, and they would put it down. Or if the vice ran in, they could just drop the string, and it would, hey, look, I'm wearing underwear. I'm not breaking the law. The genius of strippers and sex workers back in the day to current day, like the incredible work that like sex workers do to be innovative. Oh, I could go on literally all day about how great they are and how important they are to us as a society. One of the things that I really actively try to break down is the dichotomy of classy versus dirty, whereas burlesque, it is definitely moving away from it. And I have seen the shift in the last probably 4 to 5 years of like when I started, and I'm totally guilty, I said some really horphobic things. I said some really like gross things about people who worked in sex work. Not that, you know, I just didn't know, and I didn't have those lived experiences. And so the idea that like burlesque is classy whereas stripping is dirty, it's such a false dichotomy, and it's so damaging and so gross. And so I think like I am a strip performance artist. I have worked in strip clubs. You know, I am a retired sex worker currently. Doesn't mean that I might not go back to it. Doesn't mean that like, and I'm very honest and open. I'm out with most people, and again, huge privilege that I get to like sit and talk to a university about how I, you know, used to be a sex worker, and know that I won't face a lot of repercussions. That's a real huge privilege I hold. And so with that privilege, I really like to speak to the fact that like stripping and burlesque comes from stripping. Like stripping and burlesque were the same thing until like the 60s and 70s where they broke off. And burlesque functionally died for a while. Like burlesque went away until it came back kind of in the 80s and 90s. But there were people, the reason we have neo burlesque is because of strippers and sex workers keeping those traditions alive in the clubs, doing that work. Dita Von Tease was a club girl. Like all of these big performers got their start in the sex industry. and so to say that what we're doing is classy, what I'm doing is not classy. What I'm doing is incredibly ridiculous and incredibly silly. Um, but it's not classy. Nothing I've ever done has been classy. That is not a word you can use to describe me. So I think really like people who might not be as familiar with burlesque, who go into it with the idea that it's like aping sex work, and it's like a sanitized way to engage with those things. Um, I don't think that's true. Like lots of performers are sex workers. They are now, they have been, they will continue to be. They're a huge part of this conversation, and they're what drives the aesthetic. Like I see a lot of what I call my click clacks, which are the tall pleaser shoes. I've been seeing those on the stages more and more in burlesque, because the people who are working in the clubs are bringing them into the burlesque stages, and also just in general, like because of popular culture, there is very much a sex worker aesthetic that is being pushed to the forefront right now. And without getting into, is it appropriative, is stuff like it's more acceptable now to dress and act like sex workers, and in particular, like full service sex workers and strip club workers, wearing the shoes, wearing the outfits. So yeah, really just there's no difference. Burlesque is, I've heard it referred to as sexy work as opposed to sex work. Because there isn't as much danger in burlesque. There's still repercussions for people. People have still lost jobs. People have been taken to court and almost lost their children. People have had partners in divorces who have used the fact that people are burlesque performers as a way to take kids away and to manipulate people. Like there still is a stigma on burlesque. Not as much though, and it's more so in the US I've seen it. But it's not the same stigma that sex workers go through, and it's not the same struggle that they go through. There isn't the same level of danger. The danger that I've felt as a burlesque performer, which I have, stuff happens. The world is not always a safe place. Situations get hairy. It's not the same danger I have felt as working as a sex worker. It's not the same identity politics. It's not the same hustle. Like it's not the same. So really breaking down that it is a cousin and a relative and supportive of sex work, but inherently there are different dangers, and that's to be said across the whole hierarchy, as they call it. The dangers that strippers feel versus the dangers of full service workers versus the dangers of outdoor full service workers versus cam girls. And when I say versus, I don't mean they're versus. I am anti-hierarchical. No one level of sex work is more important or better or worse, or it's a community with very different lived experiences. Burlesque is silly. Burlesque is farce. It was originally a farce. It was, men would go and watch minstrel. Not gonna lie, burlesque is tied to a history of minstralism and people in blackface telling really terrible, awful jokes, and it was men smoking cigarettes and ladies showing their ankles. That's how it all started. And it's silly. It's a silly thing. I have made a living for the last decade wearing ridiculous costumes and doing this. Like and doing this. Like burlesque is a thing where you can do whatever you want. Like my one rule as a burlesque teacher is like, I don't care what you do. I don't care what your costumes are. I just want you to put in effort. I want you to
to push yourself and
push yourself. And you know what? If you're not a great dancer and you never move great and your performance style, maybe you're not that great. Who cares? If you're loving it, you're having fun, and you're putting in the work, go for it. So yeah, that's another thing I would say is like burlesque can be so serious. It can talk about sex workers' rights, the rights of people of color, Black people, Indigenous people. It can talk for and about the most marginalized aspects of our community. I'm a disabled person. There's lots of people with disabilities in burlesque who can find their power. I've seen people who are in assist devices perform in burlesque and do amazing, and they're great. And like, there is that power, not that they wouldn't do amazing and great, but they're given the opportunity to be amazing and great that they might. Well, at the same time, I do want to say that burlesque is a deeply silly thing.
It's fun and entertaining. Yeah.
Entertaining. And then for me, like, I talk about all these things, and I've had 12 years to think about all these things, and continue to think about them. Oftentimes late at night when I can't sleep, I just think about these things. And like I said, I had the privilege to have a university education. I'm educated in sociology. So the sociologist in me, you know, pick this apart for days. But it's silly and it's fun. And at the end of the day, for me, I am an entertainer. My job is to entertain. And sometimes that means taking gigs where I have to play cis and play straight and be the pretty girl and all of that. And that kind of sucks, but it puts food on my table and a roof over my head. But it also affords me the ability to dress up as a hobo clown and honk myself like I'm masturbating with a rainbow merkin on stage to people applauding and cheering. That's great.
I love it. I love it.
That's one of the best dichotomies of like, yeah, I'm gonna go out and masturbate myself to death, or pretend to masturbate myself to death in an act. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna go write a paper about that now. Queer identity and masturbation through self-love. Like, I love burlesque has the capability to have those two things live as one, and I think that's part of the queer experience, is living these dualities as queer folk. We live in duality. We live in different spaces, and out of survival, a lot of times we exist as different identities in different spaces for survival. You know, the ability to pass, the ability or want to pass. These situations of like, you know, me and my partner are polyamorous, like we don't super talk about that with their family, you know, or like you're not super out to certain people. Like, I think that's really reflected in burlesque as well, those abilities to hold that. And I think that's why it is a really great space for queer people, because you know how to live in duality. So you already got that part of burlesque down. You already nailed it. You're already perfect, queer people in the world. You're already perfect in general. But like, yeah, it's a great space to live in with that, and to live in with those identities, because it feels comfortable.